Thank you everyone for joining Aspire Technology Partners today for our webinar on securing your remote workforce. Throughout the duration of the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A chat on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We will take time at the end dedicated to a Q&A as well. With that, I will hand it over to Mike O'Connell and Doug Stevens from Aspire to kick it off.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Katie. Yeah. Good. I guess it's good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name's Doug Stevens, and I'm here with Michael O'Connell, and we're going to jump into the webinar here. So, hang on just one second. Get PowerPoint fired up here. Hopefully, everybody can see my screen. Again, my name's Doug Stevens. I've been with Aspire for a little over 16 years, and I lead our managed services practice. And Michael, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Doug. So my name is Michael O'Connell. I'm the Security Solutions Architect here at Aspire. I have over 18 years of pre- and post-sales security delivery experience.
And for those on the call that may not be super familiar with Aspire, I'm going to do a very quick commercial, just give you an idea of what we do and where we focus. So Aspire's been around for 18 years. We're very much a leading systems integrator focused on the East Coast region. And we've become very well known in the region for taking a very consultative approach to assisting our clients to align technology to drive business outcomes. So we ask a ton of questions. We really try to understand what our customers are trying to achieve, and then we align those technology solutions to achieve those outcomes. So we possess subject matter expertise across a number of practice areas, including enterprise networks, collaboration, cybersecurity, which we're going to talk a lot about today, data center and cloud, mobility, and as well as IoT. So we have a dedicated both pre-sales and service delivery subject matter experts in each one of these areas, and they're all aligned to the regions where we sit. So we're headquartered in New Jersey, but we have regional offices in the Philadelphia area, in New York, and in upstate New York, in Albany, as well as Buffalo. And then we also have very core competencies around our PMO. Everything that we deploy from a project perspective, we can manage as well. So we have a full suite of managed services. And then more recently, we've made very large investments around customer success. And their goal is helping our clients to realize the return on the investments they make around technology. So whether it's a WebEx or a subscription-based and project, or whether it's anything that's having to do with the managed services portfolio, our customer success team is there to make sure that our customers are adopting and making the most out of those technology investments. So let me just run through the agenda very quickly. I'm going to share a little bit about the state of hybrid work here. I'll share a recent IDC study here in a moment. And then I'm going to pass it off to Michael, who's going to go through the best practices around data security, talk about some of those fundamental solutions around data management and protection and business continuity, disaster recovery, but also some of the longer-term approaches and helping to sort of formulate and execute on a security roadmap. And then at the end, I'll jump back in and we'll do a few minutes on the value that managed detection and response brings in terms of identifying and responding to threats in real time and ensuring that we're safeguarding our critical IT assets 24/7. And then we'll wrap it up with some closing comments, and we'll take questions through the Q&A chat that Katie mentioned earlier. All right, so with that, let's just jump in. I thought it'd be useful to share. I read a very interesting research article from IDC, and it was sponsored by Cisco, so it's certainly very relevant to all of us on this call today. And IDC surveyed over 1,400 organizations across 12 countries, and ranging in size from 250 employees up to 5,000 across all verticals. And basically, it was to measure the readiness and maturity of those companies' hybrid work initiatives. And it was interesting because, and I'll just read the quote, that 45% of the business and technology leaders said remote and hybrid work models will be an embedded part of accepted work practices moving forward. And that 93% were planning to maintain or increase those investments in 2022. So it's interesting because 2 years ago, you know, when COVID broke, we all had this transformation, right? Everybody went to remote. We were scrambling to get VPN connections up, and then you know, WebEx and Zoom, depending upon your preference, sort of, you know, became the norm. And then we fast forward to today, and I get the sense that you know, offices are reopening, workers are coming back to the office, but you know, we have to ask ourselves, is that really true? Because, you know, we're seeing this hybrid work model. It may just persist longer than I think some of us may have anticipated. And so what IDC did was they measured the maturity levels of these organizations, and they related it to the dimensions that are shown down here on the left-hand side. So policy meaning, you know, where the rules, you know, have we defined the rules of the road, right? Who works where, when, and how. And then people and work culture is, you know, how and what can we put in place to attract and retain talent. And that's a big challenge for all of us today. And then from a technology perspective, how far are we down the road in terms of securing that hybrid work model with security and with those core resources? And then facilities. That, you know, providing that environment for innovation and community and collaboration. And IDC put these organizations into 4 buckets, right? So observers are sort of just getting started. The adopters are experimenting with deployments. The champions are implementing, but it's not yet in a pervasive manner. And innovators are implemented consistently across the organization. And what we found is that from a maturity perspective, those results clearly show that there's significant investments in technology to support those hybrid work initiatives. And 85% of those organizations fell into either the adopter or the champion role. So what that tells us is that hybrid work's not going away, and that we as technologists and those on the call today need to build a strategy that's going to support this hybrid work trend that we're seeing. And that strategy, it's going to be a collaboration across the organization. So we'll see key stakeholders from senior leadership, from the operations side, from facilities, and from HR. And IT is going to play a significant role, and IT is going to be the enabler to make hybrid work possible. So whether that's collaboration or networking or cloud adoption or software as a service, and most importantly, enabling all of this in a secure way, that's going to be super, super important. So that's a lot to cover, and there's probably some subjects for future webinars, but what we're going to focus on today is the technology piece, and then specifically you know, strategies and sort of foundational elements of security that can help you get your organization more mature as you support hybrid work and remote workers. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Michael O'Connell. And Michael, take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Doug. You mind going to the next slide with best practices for me, please? So today, guys, from a technology breakdown perspective, we're going to go through best practices for data security and protection. I'm going to go over a couple of deep dives, especially exactly what Doug just mentioned with the hybrid workplace, with the adoption, being an innovator, trying to get everyone to the far right column that Doug was showing before from that IDC. But the key foundations here from a data protection standpoint is to have a endpoint protection agent on your actual workstations, regardless whether they're on site, whether they're remote. We want to keep that protected no matter where the location is. And then comes into access control. Nowadays with cybersecurity insurance and any kind of audit requirements, multi-factor authentication, being able to not only use your Active Directory credentials, but be able to prove you are who you say you are. Controlling access to sensitive data, making sure when someone, for example, is remote, that they're not taking corporate data and putting it in a public cloud of their own or on their home network or local to their box. We want to make sure we have controlling access to PII or sensitive data. And then the access control of what can a corporate employee or user remote access as compared to when we're on site. We want to make sure that we have granular control. And with that, we have security devices and methods. One of the things that to put into place is data loss prevention. Mentioned earlier about taking a corporate document and putting it into a Dropbox, for example, or a box.com infrastructure. We want to make sure that we have policies in place to keep the PII and corporate information on the actual corporate infrastructure. And then firewall, and we want to make sure that from an egress interface that we actually have the protection in place to protect our users and our infrastructure, regardless whether they're on site or they're remote in that hybrid workspace role. And then more importantly, talk about the evolution of DNS and HTTPS protection for your organization remote when they're in a hybrid infrastructure. And then finally, and I think this is a key piece here, with phishing and malware and ransomware and a lot of other things going on in today's infrastructure, is talk about security awareness training for your organization, making sure that people know what not to click on, make sure that we're evolving and continuously training the organization. All right, and so that start at the critical building block from a hybrid work infrastructure is to have an endpoint detection and response or an EDR agent on your workstations, whether they're remote, whether it's the servers in your organization, whether it's a cloud-based hosted Azure or AWS infrastructure. The biggest thing here is be able to get away from that legacy AV and protection with you manually having interact. So there's three components here that we want to focus on. The first is protection and hardening. And what's important here is to have an EDR agent that has behavioral analytics built in and machine learning. So your IT staff and your engineering team, for example, does not need to go and update your workstations in your organization when there's a 0-day threat overnight. If it's 1 o'clock in the morning, for example, on a Sunday AM, if you don't have 24/7, 365 or an MDR solution, we want to make sure that your EDR agent can automatically update. Make sure that we posture the IT operations and in your organization throughout endpoint compliance. If something is not compliant, we want to make sure that that is isolated. From a detection perspective, I just mentioned the word isolation. We want to make sure that we have advanced analytics where we can search the endpoints remotely. So if they're home, Monday, Tuesday, and then they come back in the office Wednesday, I don't want an organization and a policy in place where they can bring an infected workstation back into my office, regardless of what their location is in a hybrid work environment. We want to make sure that we have a sandboxing and threat hunting infrastructure. And then the final piece of this EDR is isolation. So if I have a response and application control, if someone clicks on a malicious link, or if they download a malicious file, I want to be able to control endpoint isolation very quickly, very fast, and be able to perform threat responses into a single pane of glass security platform. So with that, one of the things I really focused on after the endpoint protections from the best practices is MFA. So Aspire, and we do multiple different MFAs, but I'm going to really speak about Duo and Okta. They're kind of the two industry leaders and standards that I recommend. If you do not have MFA and you're looking at cybersecurity insurance, for example, first thing they're going to ask that I've seen on majority of the cybersecurity insurance audits is what's your MFA? Are you protecting users? Anybody that's remote, we want to make sure that when they're VPNing in and they're off network, we are doing MFA protections. One of the things that has changed specifically with the hybrid workplace and COVID, and everyone, like myself, for example, I've worked mostly remote for 8+ years. That's not the case for a large amount of organizations, right? But with MFA, we don't have to go back to that legacy option of using only a hardware token. So nowadays, for example, I have an Apple Watch. I can get a Duo push or an Octa push directly to my Apple Watch. I can do it on my phone. If you have policies in your organization, for example, and you don't want to have them use their own personal devices, we can do phone calls. We can enable and integrate a soft token. Even go as far as biometrics. So, for example, from a cyber security perspective, how about for your admins, engineers, people like myself that have elevated privileges? I can do biometric multi-factor authentication to make them prove they are who they say they are when they're utilizing their elevated credentials. It's very easy to enable multiple options for use and flexibility. So it's not a one size fits all. Both Duo and Okta can support all this. And then the last thing is if someone, for example, doesn't have a smartphone and sometimes they're out there still, we can do standard text messages. So you don't need to have a one size fits all approach for MFA deployment options. So the biggest thing you'll get as soon as you implement MFA, and this is something that from a risk assessment perspective, we want to easily identify your device security postures in your organization. Make sure we know what the devices are running. And with MFA and the mobile apps, for example, you can quickly identify, is it a managed device? Is the software that's running on this up to date? And this is applicable to Windows and Macs also, not just the actual mobile app. Is the device encrypted? Is there BitLocker, or do we have actually disk encryption enabled? And then from a mobile device, do we have best practice of a password protected? Do they have to put a actual password on their phone to unlock it, which is obviously best practice? The same thing from biometric. Maybe they want to do a Face ID or a fingerprint. And then from a device perspective, is the device enabled with a firewall? Not only do you want to use the obviously Windows firewall, but a next generation firewall in your organization is best practices. And then after we have a baseline of configurations and options from your MFA, we want to take that data and what the user's actual end devices are, whether that's a workstation, phone, Google Chromebook, VDI, and we want to enforce adaptive security policies. So there's a lot of buzzwords out there on the internet, especially with the hybrid workforce and the way things are changing, such as SASE and zero trust. And I'll get into them a little bit more. But more importantly, what you want to do is create a customizable security policy specific to your organization. And doing this is going to allow you to do granular control where you can enforce security not only at a global level, but based off application levels. So if I have a specific internal application, maybe it's a accounting or an HR infrastructure, I want to be able to control it at a group and application level. The next thing is establish a level of trust, not only based off your Active Directory for your users' credentials, but also the device that it's running on. Gone are the days where you only want to just do Active Directory. We want to be able to make sure that not only do we trust the user, they're multi-factor authenticated, but also we trust the device and the device has a security posture applied to it. Right, so with Aspire, we also offer multifaceted approach, and here comes that word I just mentioned, that's SASE. SASE stands for Secure Access Service Edge. And what that is protecting your organization on the edge, no matter whether that's on premises, whether they're remote, whether that's in Azure, at your data center, maybe if you have a colo location, and then doing that with a multifaceted approach. And Aspire succeeds in multiple levels, like Doug mentioned earlier, not only at the data center, but more importantly, what I speak about is the security. So we have expertise in multiple next generation firewalls. We have full both pre-sales and post-sales expertise in TrustSec integration, being able to do certificate handshakes between your internal platforms. The same for other vendors such as Palo Alto and Fortinet. And one of the things that I like to highlight here at Aspire is the strength of our managed services security division. So whether you have, whether it's a Cisco full shop, whether it's a hybrid shop, whether it's Palo Alto, Fortinet, and other vendors that I couldn't fit on the slide, we have a very strong strength in our team delivery from a managed security services offering. So one of the products, and think it's something that I like to focus on when you start looking at SASE, right? Being able to protect your organization in a hybrid workspace. And one of the products that I like to focus on, and I know a lot of people have this deployed in your organization. And if you don't, I'd be more than happy to go into more details and help you get a pilot stood up. But one of the products that I like to focus on for this and to get to that SASE architecture is Cisco Umbrella. And this slide right here is kind of an overview of how really the hybrid workplace and remote workers and how the technology has changed since the integration from 2009, where it was DNS-based traffic. And then you add internet security in 2012. Cisco then brings that into their fold in 2015. And more importantly, as we continue going on, you'll see they have something here called SIG, and I'm going to go into that. That's Secure Internet Gateway. What that does is give you a cloud-based integration to protect your organization and your assets and your users, regardless of the actual location. It's perfect for a hybrid workspace. And then we go all the way to the right where we're at now, and it kind of stopped at this slide here in 2020 because it's still evolving, but really the continued evolution towards cloud-native, multifunction security and networking, being able to do everything from a single pane of glass. So this is the product that I was just referring to, and this is a highlight overview of everything that's included with the SIG package, or Secure Internet Gateway, right? So you have your DNS layer security, but what you get now is you get a couple real advanced features that can help you protect your organization in the hybrid workspace for remote workers. Number one is Secure Web Gateway. You can control branch offices, smaller sites. Maybe you have users at home that have a direct VPN connection. I can do Secure Web Gateway from a single pane of glass. I get a cloud delivered firewall, so I can go ahead and protect my users and my organizations without deploying that expensive hardware box. I'm sure we're all aware, and if you're not aware, there is some major supply chain issues. So one of the ways that Aspire and Cisco Umbrella SIG can help you is to utilize a cloud delivered firewall that does not require a on-box, on-premises device. The two other ones that I really want to focus here, and I think is important, specifically with the hybrid workspace, is the Cloud Access Security Broker, also known as CASB. And what this does is this is going to give you tracking and enforcement to, kind of lock down your O365 or your any kind of cloud services, right? So whether that's Dropbox, Box.com, this is designed around making sure that if someone's home, they're not taking a PII or a sensitive document and they're uploading it to a public cloud that is not part of the organization's infrastructure. And that kind of coincides directly with data loss prevention. We want to put policies in place. So if you have, for example, financial documents or social security numbers or credit card transactions, just as some examples here, but anything that it's really PII, we want to make sure that we have DLP, or data loss prevention, in place. And all of this is included with Umbrella SIG from a single pane of glass. One of the things that a lot of people don't really offer and talk about is remote browser isolation. So nowadays, about 80 to 90% of traffic is all done on the web browser, right? So if I have a workstation that's remote, I'm going to be able to implement RBI, or remote browser isolation, where I can lock that down and remediate that device without having to have it come back on site. If someone's not going to be in for 3 days, I don't want to just have that workstation in a malicious state and then returning to my organization or having to call the person. I can do this all automatically on the back end. So one of the things that I was talking about earlier is SASE, or Secure Access Service Edge. What is SASE? Okay, so it's the convergence of all your networking security services in a single pane of glass, right? So everything coming together, being able to talk to one another. That includes Secure Web Gateway, which I mentioned, where you can actually lock down, branch or remote sites. CASB, which is that data from a cloud perspective. So anything in Azure, Google Drive, Dropbox, the same thing on and on from a cloud storage perspective. And then the DNS protection, right? Being able to control and access based off my Active Directory user groups, for example, what people can and cannot browse to. For example, marketing may need to go to social media sites, but as an engineer or an architect, I don't need to be on social media sites all day. So I want to be able to control what my corporate assets are doing regardless of their location. Firewalling as a service, being able to deploy rapidly new firewall rules without having to log on to every single solitary box anymore, being able to lock down the workstation. SD-WAN, if your organization's looking at a software-defined wide area network, being able to couple the network and the security services being able to talk to one another. And then one of the other big terms that's really out there now is zero trust network access, that ZTNA acronym. And this is important because this basically can go ahead and stop malicious attacks in your organization, because what it's going to do is not only have a multi-factor or authentication attempt when someone VPNs into your organization, but then we're also going to enable that when they try to access an application, if they're remote, for example. So if you were to have a malicious outbreak, that actual program will not be able to get past that second stage, and that's really where you want to get to. So it's kind of a bundled approach, a SASE with zero trust network access. And then one of the biggest things here, and Gartner recommends it, and this is a extremely emerging maturity technology. Since 2020, this has grown rapidly. This slide was actually created out in 2019, but this is the approach that the adopters and what Doug was showing you earlier from the IDC is really being brought on board from a CASB and cloud-based infrastructure. So one of the key capabilities, and I keep saying it, but more importantly, is following like a three-pronged approach. Visibility is number one. Being able to control and see what's happening with my corporate assets on and off the network. So in a hybrid workspace, maybe you do 2 days at home, I'll have visibility on if Mike O'Connell is working from home, what he's doing on a corporate asset, regardless of whether I'm in the office, whether I'm home, whether I'm at a Starbucks, no matter what, I'm going to have visibility on what's going on with that. More importantly, I'll be able to see all the internet and the application traffic. And nowadays, 90% of web traffic is HTTPS, right? So 443, it's encrypted. I want to be able to do SSL decryption without having to offload that to my physical firewall. I want to be able to protect my actual workstation. So whether that's DNS layer, whether that's web inspection, more importantly, from a data loss. I also want to be able to have a local IPS agent on my workstation. I mentioned earlier about RBI, or remote browser isolation, being able to control that protection. So with the umbrella, some of the other options, and this is a flexible connection method, right? So whether I have a headquarters and I can build an IPsec tunnel in a branch location, or whether I want to do only web-based traffic, I can do a proxy chain or a cloud pack. And then more importantly, what I like to call and really focus on here is those roaming workstations. So that is where your hybrid workspace comes into play. So it's very flexible, easy to deploy, regardless of the actual topology of your organization. So putting it all together, everything that I just mentioned in regards to specifically remote workers coming back into the site, and everything with the umbrella SIG, this is kind of a high-level overview of the way that the traffic can be traversed. So on the left-hand side, I have my branch office, I have my MFAs, I have my workstations, and then all of that traffic is then mitigated and addressed from a security level into the umbrella SIG gateway. This includes your IPS, your DLP, your RBI, right? All the CASB. So on the bottom there, you'll see everything what I'm referring to as the SIG level. And then after that traffic is security postured and checked, we go to the internet. So the same SASE model would apply whether they're in the office or whether they're remote. This is the way that the traffic is traversing the network. So then the final thing that I really have to focus on, it's something that Inspire and what we recommend heavily is number one is security awareness training. Some of the biggest school districts or organizations, commercial spaces, for example, one of the biggest threats, and I have to say this, sometimes it's the users, right? The way they click on an email. So one of the recommendations that I have is to frequently train your users. Do internal phishing analysis and testing. So, perform a baseline testing. Assess what the users know. Make sure that, for example, if a user clicks on a link that they thought was a legitimate email, make sure that we include training. It's only going to help your security posturization and a data privacy perspective for your organization. Make sure you're setting up monthly or quarterly internal phishing, fully automated. We don't want to have to spend a lot of time. So we recommend creating simulated phishing templates that look like it's a real internal email. And then more importantly, take the results. So maybe you implement it, take 30 days, then quarterly. do it again, and make sure that your organization is continuing to learn and progress from a security posture perspective.
All right. Well, I'll take it back from Mike. That was a lot to go through there. That was excellent and very, very relevant in terms of helping to secure the remote and hybrid workplace. You know, my comment there would be it's a journey, right, Mike, where you don't have to do SASE all at once, and implementing zero trust is, you know, not something that's done overnight. So any thoughts that you have in terms of, you know, the best approach to taking this on? Maybe some quick wins, maybe a security roadmap.
So I think, Doug, that's an absolutely fantastic point, right? It's a journey. It is an absolute roadmap. It's not something, there's no light switch. You can't just flip this on. It is a process. Two things that come to immediately to mind is an EDR. Make sure you have an advanced behavior analytics, machine learning, endpoint protection. The next approach, I think, is really implementing MFA, making sure they are who they say they are in your organization. And I like to start really at the end, at the VPN level, really at your egress, right? So from a hybrid workspace, and then move into that, you know, the remote monitoring and being able to control the machines in case there's an incident when they're remote.
Got it. Well, that is excellent, and actually a really good segue into what I wanted to touch on over the last 8 or 10 minutes here that we have with everybody, and that is managed detection and response. It's by far the fastest growing part of our managed services portfolio, and I'm sure you know, folks have heard that acronym quite a bit, especially with, you know, dealing with, you know, how do you protect your organization against ransomware. We get a lot of interest in MDR just from the standpoint of customers need to have some sort of monitoring in place in order to get cyber insurance. So a lot of traction around that. And the one thing that I want to emphasize here is that all of the investments that you make in the tools and those layers of protection that Mike talked about earlier, it's equally important to have the ability to be monitoring the alerts that those tools generate in some meaningful way. And that's really, that can be a challenge for a lot of organizations. We know that it's hard to find, you know, experienced security talent. It's expensive. It's hard to keep them. And we also know that a lot of us in IT wear multiple hats, right? So you may have network responsibilities or systems responsibilities or collaboration, or whatever it happens to be, and then you're also doing security as well. And we just know that from the complexity of the security threats out there, the involving nature of them, it's just really, really difficult to keep up. And the other thing that we see a lot of is that folks have these security controls in place, but they may not be tuned properly. They may not have the expertise in-house to be able to interpret those alerts. And what happens is there's a flood of events coming at them, and you know, you're not sure what's real, what's, you know, what you could ignore, what's noise, and what you should be focusing on. And as a result of that, you know, things get missed, and that's when, you know, that's when we have a bad day. And the importance, and there's a lot going on in this slide, but I think this slide helps to bring home the importance of why we really need to be monitoring security events. And what this slide says, and this is based on a report from Ponyman from 2019, is that on the average, it's 206 days before an organization can identify or detect that something bad is happening in their environment. And I've seen other reports where it's 150 days, and we can argue about what that time frame is. But regardless, whether it's 150 days, 200, that's 5, 6, in some cases 7 months where that piece of malicious code is present in the environment. And we know that you know, ransomware isn't a singular event, right? It's not you click on a link and, oh, I'm infected with ransomware. No, what generally happens is there's some sort of infiltration, right? So clicking on that link may be that infiltration piece, but then after that, there's always some type of reconnaissance, right? Or lateral movement where that, you know, that attacker is trying to get elevated privileges or, you know, identify other hosts that it can infect. And then the end game there is, some type of either exfiltrating that data and holding that ransom and threatening to release it, or encrypting the data, right, until you pay that ransom. And what happens is the longer that malicious activity takes hold in your environment, the more expensive it is to, obviously, to resolve, and the more damage that it can do. And so what the answer is, and what the market is showing, is that companies are looking for partners in MSSPs and MDR providers to really take on that ongoing 24/7 threat detection and response. And what they're looking for is an outcome, right? They're looking for that MSSP to be an extension of their team, and to really provide that be able to identify, to investigate, and respond to those threats in real time. And so that's what we do. We have a 24/7 network and security operations center here in our headquarters in New Jersey. We have an expert team of security analysts and incident responders that are doing 24/7 monitoring and threat detection. They're all Aspire employees. They're all US-based. We don't outsource. We don't white label. We don't do any of that. We follow ITIL best practices. We're SOC 2 Type 2 certified, so we go through that third-party, rigorous audit process on an annual basis to make sure that we're following those processes and procedures to ensure that we're performing this service in a secure way. And what we provide is very high touch, right? Very collaborative. We get to know our clients' environments. We assign analysts and incident responders to specific clients, so that there's that fluency, right, in how that client wants to be communicated with, and how we dovetail with their internal resources. And so if you're not familiar with MDR, really by definition, it's a remote security operations function, right, where we're doing 24/7 threat monitoring and detection and response, and we're doing that as a turnkey experience, right? So all of the people, all of the expertise, the platforms, the processes, that's all part of the service delivery. And it's typically around a predefined technology stack, right, that spans from the cloud layer to the network layer down to the endpoint. So we're taking in the telemetry from those tools that Mike had mentioned earlier, and we're in our case, we use a platform that we've branded as Vigilance, right? It's a combination of our own intellectual property as well as off the shelf tools, I should say. And that platform has a ton of automation. We inject threat intelligence into that. So that gives us the ability to filter out all of the noise and focus in on those events that are a potential issue and that require further analysis, right? So when we see something that looks potentially an issue, an alert's triggered, a ticket gets sent to our security operations center, and then there's a security analyst that is doing that initial triage, and then determining whether, hey, this is worthy of further analysis. I'm going to do some investigation. And we follow a very defined process. We call them response playbooks, and just making sure that we're responding to these in a very prescriptive manner. And so what that output is that you now have the ability to have 24/7 visibility across your enterprise, and you have dedicated resources that are doing threat detection and response. And I call that sort of the maturity of your security operations, right? You're outsourcing it to a partner, but at the end of the day, what you're getting is that ability to reduce or minimize that mean time to identify and respond to threats. And so this is an architectural view of how we deploy the service. And again, if we see something based upon our Vigilance platform, based upon those security events that we're taking from the tools that Mike mentioned, doing that correlation, analysis, alerts are triggered, and we have security analysts that are eyes on glass 24/7. So they'll take that alert, they'll do the analysis, they'll notify our customer, and then they'll go through that process of investigating, understand what the potential impact of that threat is within the environment, where that host maybe is communicated with over the last 24 hours or 7 days or whatever it happens to be. And then we'll take those threat containment and remediation actions on behalf of our client, right? So that could be isolating a host, for instance, right? And these actions could depend on time of day or day of week or whatever it happens to be. But all of the interaction and how we're going to address specific threats is all built into a run book, and it's all customized with each one of our clients. So we can either take those steps on their behalf or work with them in a collaborative way to address that threat, remediate, and address whatever that issue is within the environment. So the output there, right? At the end of the day, what that provides is that peace of mind, right? That you as an either IT director or CISO, whatever it happens to be, you know that there's a means in place to be doing 24/7 monitoring to identify and respond to those threats in near real time. And really the investment there is a fraction of the cost of what it would take to build it yourself, hire the people, you know, the platforms and all of that. For a lot of organizations, it's not responsible financially to do it or feasible. And in a lot of cases, again, depending upon the size of the environment, the number of users, we can deploy this service for less than it would cost to hire an additional full-time employee with security expertise. And again, the value there is that we're doing this 24/7, right? And, you know, we don't go home at night, we don't take weekends off, we don't go on vacation. So it's that 24/7 motion in there to ensure that we're safeguarding your critical assets. So that's what I wanted to cover on the MDR side. I think perhaps there may be some questions. I'm going to pass it back to Katie. Katie, did we get any questions in the Q&A that either Mike or myself can address?
Yes, thank you guys both. I do see a few questions that came through on my end, but before I ask those, I will pause for a moment and let the audience please unmute yourselves if you wanted to vocalize or ask any questions that you may have. Okay. One question that came through, with the hybrid workforce changing the way we work, where do you recommend we start our process?
I think that's a multifaceted approach. Obviously the first key correlation is the endpoint detection and response agents. Make sure that you have the machine analytics enabled. After that, as you said, Doug and I mentioned and kind of talked about it before. It's a journey. So I think that is the first place that we need to focus on from an endpoint perspective. If you have that in place, then I would say let's look at the MFA and the DNS level.
Yeah, I agree. And I would just add to that you know, if you're still running sort of legacy antivirus on the endpoints, really you need to get some sort of EDR in place there that's doing that behavioral-based analytics and isolation and blocking. And then the other thing I would say is that a lot of what Mike had mentioned earlier is they're cloud-based tools, right? So they're easy to implement. It's not a heavy lift. There's quick wins there that can really, you know, move the needle in terms of securing your hybrid workforce with not a ton of investment and not a lot of effort from an implementation standpoint.
Yeah, and Doug, to complement that, I think for anybody that's interested, everything that I mentioned and Doug and I talked about today, we can do pilots and stand it up as specifically Doug just mentioned. It's in a cloud-based platform. It's not going to require large investment from a hardware perspective on site. So if you're interested in a pilot or seeing the tools used from a perspective in your infrastructure, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to help you set that up.
Great. Thanks, guys. I have one more question that came through on my end. What do you think is a good standard for security practices for remote workers?
I think that it's also a complicated question, but in my opinion, setting up Active Directory based policies, regardless of their location, whether they're on site or they're remote, but also, and Doug could speak to that from an MDR perspective, making sure that the alerts coming in are actually valid alerts. They're not false positives, and you have the, an MDR solution in place and a partner that knows the tools correctly and to make sure the alerts are getting acted on.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it there, Mike. I don't have anything to add there really, other than if there's something that was of interest to our listeners, our attendees today, and you want to do a deeper dive, leverage Mike or one of his colleagues in the security practice. Reach out to your account managers, reach out to us directly. We'd be happy to facilitate it. And yeah, if you'd like to evaluate or pilot any of the technologies that you saw today, we'd be happy to do that. And look forward to further engagement and help you get further down that security journey.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.